We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I am a partnerships manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Kristen Lisanti. She is the Chief Culture Officer at BCW. Kristen, how's your day going?
My day is great. Thank you, Christina. It's happy to be here with you.
Yes, thanks for being on the show. If you want to start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself, be sure to include your pronouns. And also, when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Okay, I love that question. So hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Lisanti. I'm Chief Culture Officer at BCW, which is a global marketing communications agency. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. When I was young, I was really into Star Trek: The Next Generation. And there was a character on The Next Generation named Deanna Troi. Mm-hmm. And Deanna's job on board was, she was an empath. She was a professional empath. So when they would encounter alien life forms and different, types of people and beings across the galaxy, she would be the one to kind of understand or be able to communicate first with the new people. And I always thought that job seemed amazing. And so, but then, I forgot about this as I grew up and went to school for things that had nothing to do with what I'm doing today. And I remembered Deanna Troi only a couple years ago as I came back into this role at BCW, working in a very focused way on corporate culture and relationships and helping people translate not only across geographic boundaries, but also ways of thinking, ways of working, ways of relating, all sorts of differences and finding our commonalities together. So I wanted to be Deanna Troi, and in some ways that dream has come true.
I love that. Pop culture has definitely influenced my personal journey as well, especially growing up and seeing what you can be in terms of careers. And fast forward to now, you're the Chief Culture Officer at BCW. How do you think that your personal journey has really led you up until this point at the company?
I don't think it's a journey I ever could have mapped. Mm-hmm. I went to college. I was an English major. I intended to go to grad school and be a poetry professor. That was my whole plan for, all throughout college. And then I took a year off, volunteered with AmeriCorps, and fell in love with service and change. And that has been the theme of my career ever since then. I went to work in communications and public relations, doing public education and social change work. So I worked on voter registration and get out the vote initiatives with Rock the Vote.
Love it.
I worked on obesity prevention initiatives. I worked on early childhood development education initiatives in underserved communities. And my last campaign that I ran as a professional communicator was around reducing the stigma around mental illness in the state of California. And so change was the theme, right? And my personal life also was changing in very dramatic ways, all at the same time. I was moving cities. I was, I've always just been really attracted to and interested in how we change personally, behaviorally, but also in relationship to one another and as communities and societies. So it was behavioral change, and then it was societal change, and now it's organizational change. And I feel like I'm using everything that fed into those early years every day in this role.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned at the beginning that it's nothing that you could have mapped, but when you look back, there is a common theme of change and being a change agent and really wanting to have an impact on the communities that you are in as well. For Reimagining Company Culture, I've had folks on that are chief people officers, CHROs, and just like in these roles that people might have heard of before. For chief culture officer, what do key objectives look like for folks who aren't familiar with the role? And I know we talked a little bit about in terms of team structure, but what does that look like at BCW as well?
It seems to me, in talking to the other chief culture people that I've met, that every single one of us defines this role a little bit differently. And I think that that's about right for a word like culture that can be very nebulous. So I think it's important that anybody who comes to this work has a a way that they personally connect to it and the way that they define it. So for me, my definition and my key objective is to cultivate a healthy ecosystem for our people. We have about 4,000 people around the world, and I see our culture as that ecosystem that either supports them to grow and to move, or it doesn't, right? So we have to create an environment for them to thrive. So I do a lot of leadership development work, a lot of internal change management consultation and parts of our business that are turning those corners and that need some help greasing the wheels, or coming up against barriers and knocking those down or powering through, and training our teams around a big theme for us here at BCW is growth mindset. So helping our teams practice and continually come back to that place of what's possible. Let's lean into this challenge. Let's see what we can do together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially over this past year, everyone's had to fall into that growth mindset too, and just be innovative in terms of creating a really healthy ecosystem where folks and people at your organization can thrive. I'm sure there are so many projects that you're working on a day-to-day basis, but what is one that you're currently excited about right now?
My baby, if you will, is probably our leadership development program, which we call Leading Above the Line. It is a 12-week leadership development course, really, and but we talk about it as a transformational experience, because it's not like, here's this strategy, here's this tool, do this thing for your team. It really is about honoring the fact that leadership starts within us, right? We are as leaders as we are as people. And if we're going to grow as leaders, it really means being able to do a significant amount of self-reflection, developing our self-awareness, our emotional intelligence, which really begins within us. So we use mindfulness meditation practice in this program as our mechanism for developing that self-awareness, that emotional intelligence, as well as resilience, flexibility, creativity, and really, in the most basic sense, kind of our thesis statement for Leading Above the Line is we want to give our people, and particularly our leaders, more space to choose how they respond to challenges. So when we're on automatic pilot and when we're under a lot of pressure and under a time crunch, a lot of the time we're not really choosing. We're defaulting to our old modes, our old strategies. But with some mindful awareness, we're creating a little bit more space for us to actively be choosing how we're showing up and how we're leading.
Yeah, I think the role of leaders is definitely so important, especially in creating a culture where people feel like they are included and they're empowered and supported. And it sounds like through this transformational program, you're not giving people kind of a cookie cutter list of things to do. You're really meeting them where they are and just empowering them to lead in that way. Another piece of, creating an environment of inclusivity, whether it's hybrid or in person as well, is psychological safety. It's something that Edmondson talks about and a lot of folks are talking about in terms of people strategies. How do you really promote psychological safety at BCW?
So psychological safety is a fully half of the work that we're doing around our culture here. We think about a growth culture and a culture that supports growth as needing two conditions that really work in parallel together. We need to have a challenge, a meaningful challenge, which can come from pursuing a vision, or from pursuing stretch goals. It can come from just the fact that we're living, in a global pandemic. But also a volatile and uncertain and complex, business environment. So challenges, no problem. There's no shortage of that. But we have to meet those challenges with safety. And that safety is psychological safety for sure. You're safe to make mistakes, you're safe to take risks and fail, but also the safety to be yourself and the knowledge that you're going to be respected for what it is that you uniquely bring to the table. So we think about it in terms of inclusion very much so as well. It's one of our key principles that without that psychological safety, there is no growth. So that informs everything we do, from how we deliver feedback to how we navigate conflict, to how we support people in their career growth, to how we hire, frankly. So it is something that we really value. We watch for in ourselves, and we support one another in continually showing up and creating safe environments for our folks.
Yeah, I definitely agree that psychological safety really fosters growth, and also in terms of personal development, but also for the product or service too, having that trust in your colleagues or teammates to give your feedback and to show up at work and provide that is really important. In your experience, what is really vital to ensure that all employees at BCW really feel like they are part of the culture?
We have to design for that to be a reality. So since I started this role nearly 3 years ago, we have pursued culture through a design thinking lens, which means starting with understanding as deeply as possible the experience our people have of working here, but then really engaging them in an ongoing, continuous way to co-create this culture with us. So we have internal think tanks, for example, that have been developed by my colleague and partner, Carol Watson, who's our Chief Inclusion Officer, that are set up around, okay, how do we make our professional development processes and systems more inclusive? How do we make our recruitment and hiring processes and systems more inclusive? And anyone can opt into these think tanks to help us address weaknesses in our systems, create new possibilities, leverage what's already working somewhere, and really bring it out of the corner and into a more scalable way to benefit the broader business. So that is one way in which we are really moving away from this top-down command and control approach to culture and embracing systems that allow our people to be co-creators of the culture with us.
Absolutely. I think it's so important to highlight that what you're talking about is really about a system, and it's not about, Kristen making the culture really inclusive. It's about everybody wanting to do that as well. Also, that's an incredible amount of pressure for you too, as an individual or just as a team as well. It's something that everybody needs to work on. And you mentioned just scalable processes, operational and repeatable things that you can do. A lot of folks who are listening might be curious about what initiatives really look like that you're working on as well. Can you talk a little bit about that to give some examples?
Sure. We have a lot of initiatives underway that relate to these systems. We have, in addition to the think tanks in partnership with Carol Watson, our Chief Inclusion Officer, we every year run a month-long kind of content initiative around inclusion, different themes of inclusion. We just had it in May. It was a whole month devoted to breaking bias, really exploring how bias shows up in our own lives and in our own brains, but then also how it shows up in relationship to one another and in the ways that we cultivate those relationships, both in a business and also in a remote scenario. And how does that impact the ways that we include or we do not? And then importantly, getting back to the system piece, looking at our systems and our processes and shopping for bias, as Carol says, to see if we can identify areas where bias is baked into our systems, or at least we could design some disruptors for the natural biases that occur, by virtue of being a human being. So that's some of the fun that we're having around that. We have a number of different initiatives, though, around, to kind of complement our leadership development program. We also have a manager training program that every single person who has a direct report in our business will go through. We've just finished a couple pilot rounds, and we are well on our way to something that's going to scale across the whole business. And that supports our people in developing inclusive leadership behaviors, along with emotional intelligence, adaptive leadership styles, so that you, as you said earlier, Christina, are meeting people where they are, not just imposing your perspective or your style on everyone. All the way up to, how are we mitigating burnout as a business, and how are we helping people manage their workloads and really communicate back to their leaders and to the business itself how they're doing and what they need.
It sounds like there's a lot happening in terms of supporting people managers. And I was having a conversation the other day, and they referred to people managers as culture conduits. I think that's so true in terms of what you were talking about in terms of burnout and welcoming new employees and just the culture you're creating on your team, not assuming what they need, but having that conversation. And you're a C-level executive at the company too. How do you really measure people manager and C-level executive effective leadership when you reflect on this? Like, how do you really think about, are we doing a good job here?
Well, the leadership development program that I mentioned earlier, Leading Above the Line, we have, that is a by application program. So we have people basically on waiting lists to come in and go through that experience. But we also do pre and post assessments to help them gauge for themselves the growth trajectory that they're on and the ways in which they're really deepening their understanding of themselves and how they lead. And I guess I would answer your question by taking that example and extending it to the way that we approach leadership development and manager effectiveness, or leader and manager effectiveness, which is, I think we're all on a journey. You know, we do not have a system at BCW, nor will we under my watch, where we are, you're a good leader, you're a bad leader, this person has no hope, et cetera. It's really about, okay, where are your strengths? Where are you getting in your own way? And let's start to look for opportunities through coaching or through one of these programs that I've mentioned for you to start to get out of your own way and really step into the leader that you're meant to be. We don't think that there's one right way. We think that, you know, our many differences within this very complex business that we operate are what make us outstanding partners to our clients. But we really need to know ourselves in order to bring those strengths forward, individually and in the collective.
Everybody is different, and like you said, we're on a different journey, whether it's people managers or just employees at the company, and all of these programs and life changes that we've seen over the past year as well. So many people are dealing with so many different things, and when you're implementing new programs or just changing strategies, people are always going to have feedback, whether it's super positive, negative, and everything in between. How do you really capture this employee feedback and impart employee listening? What is your strategy there?
Yes, we have multiple strategies. We have anonymous surveys. We have regular town halls with our team members and invite Q&A before, during, after. But for me, in terms of this ecosystem that we're looking to develop and cultivate for our people, we really need to bring it down to the level of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And we need to do everything that we can to ensure that working with leaders and managers, that one-on-one or small group conversations are happening on a regular basis that really allow people to ask for what it is that they need, to voice the ways in which they want to grow, and to connect to a sense of, you know, purpose within the organization. So we know that the best managers do this already and are already having these conversations. We know that lots of us get busy. Or we get overrun by the day-to-day demands that we have. In our business, we have clients, we have partners, we have all sorts of different demands on our time. So we are being very intentional this year about, and very systematic actually, about making sure that every person in our business has conversations with their manager about how they're growing and what their kind of area of their comfort zone they want to lean into and beyond, right? We're asking everyone to identify one. We're having conversations with them about what is it, especially as we are thinking about returning to office in a more focused way. What are the needs that you have? What have you learned about yourself over these last 18 months in terms of how you work well and what you need in order to do successful, sustainable work here at BCW? We want to be having that conversation. And then finally, you know, on a purpose and meaning front, you know, where do you derive your satisfaction from your work? What is it that you get out of bed every morning to do? And can we help you articulate kind of a mission for yourself? You know, what is it that you really want to do here? And let's do everything that we can to align you toward that purpose on a day-to-day basis. So these are the kinds of conversations that we are having, and we are structuring it for our people so that we know that everyone is getting that kind of attention and care. And then the beautiful thing about it from an employee feedback perspective, Christina, is that our managers are then having these conversations one-on-one with our folks. And then they're getting back together at the collective peer level and saying, okay, what are the key themes that we're hearing from people? And that makes us as an organization, as a system, smarter and more able to invest where we need to, reorient our ways of working, right? If everybody comes back and says, we're having this issue, or we have too many meetings, not enough time to think, okay, how do we set up some guardrails for our people so that we are meeting their needs in the collective and not just on an individual basis. So that's trying to get those conversations, and then really importantly, the feedback loops going so that we can make sure that we're addressing their needs.
Absolutely. It sounds like on an individual one-on-one level and at a peer and collective level, and then at a company level, it is really important to capture that feedback, make sure that you're fostering growth and having that conversation if anything needs to be changed or iterated on as well in terms of a people strategy, like you said, meetings or anything like that. I know from a career development standpoint, it sounds really important for the individual, but I really want to stress, why is it important? Like, what have you seen in terms of the impact of all of this employee listening and building trust at your organization? How does that really manifest on a company level?
It's a little unusual in the agency world for us to be having conversations like this if we think about it in historic terms. We are an organization, or we're an industry that's very client-centric. We're an industry that many of us and our peers in the industry bill our time by the hour. There are we in public relations in particular, the way that it's historically worked is it's generally been more of a reactive culture. And I, who grew up in this industry, have seen there not be a lot of authenticity. The PR mantra is just kind of like, okay, put on a smile and like make it happen, right? There are a lot of, I am one of them, a lot of type A perfectionists in this industry, right? And I'm one of them, and I'm recovering, and I'm trying to help my team members come along as well. So it's unusual for an agency to talk about psychological safety, about mindfulness, about empathy. So we are introducing some very important concepts that resonate deeply with our people. But in terms of how it is showing up, it just comes down to, okay, we know these things are important. We're developing some vocabulary around talking about them. But at the end of the day, are we showing up differently? Are we walking the walk? Are we really, as I said earlier around leadership, are we really looking in the mirror and owning our responsibility for how we're showing up and leading our teams? And when we're not, when we fall short, when we fail, are we leveraging our growth mindset to reflect on what we did well, what we can do better, and then go forward and truly strive for change? I think that so often employee feedback or requests, they go into a void, a black hole. They don't connect to anything meaningful, and that just serves to skewer trust and really demolish it within a culture. So I encourage all our leaders, and I try to embody this myself, to fail fast, fail forward, and fail in front of everybody, to the extent that you're comfortable or uncomfortable, to make it safe for everyone else. Better than being perfect. Let's be human together. So I think that over time, and particularly, I guess if there's a gift from the last year, it has really helped us reckon with our humanity in a way that I don't know that we as an industry have done before. So we're leveraging that to the fullest as we are, hoping to come out of it, at least into whatever is next together.
Yeah, I think that modeling behavior that you mentioned in terms of being vulnerable and failing in front of everyone and really owning mistakes or just leading with empathy is so important, and it really contributes to a healthy company culture. I know one of the things you mentioned is also vocabulary. Common language, I think, is really important too. And when we talk about things like a healthy company culture and an unhealthy company culture, can you talk about how do you define those and what does that mean in your terms?
Yeah, definitely. It goes back to that ecosystem metaphor I referenced earlier. I literally think about culture as like a coral reef, right? Your culture in any organization is an ecosystem, right? And it's a very complex ecosystem. There's infinite factors, right? And infinite organisms that are living in and sustaining this culture. So complex that it can't be controlled. Like we talked about earlier, from a top-down perspective. You can't plan a culture. You said earlier, like, oh, that would be a lot of pressure on you, Kristen. it's just not possible, right? It's not, I can't like, no one person can do it. But I will say this about leadership and about a healthy culture. I define a healthy cultural ecosystem as one that supports growth and movement. And an unhealthy cultural ecosystem, which probably all of us have been a part of one at some point or another, there's no growth in those cultures. There's just survival. Your primary preoccupation in an unhealthy culture is just getting through the day, trying not to lose your job, trying not to get taken down by whatever it is, office politics, toxic personalities, you name it. But in a truly healthy culture, there is growth, there is movement. You are becoming more yourself, right? In a toxic or unhealthy culture, you're kind of becoming more like everybody else because that's the only way to survive. And from a leadership perspective, while leaders can't control the culture or make it what they want it to be by design, they do set the conditions for the culture in the same way that, for example, the temperature of the water in that coral reef, right? That's the leadership impact. So is the water hot, right? Is everybody just trying to sweat it out? The leader has a significant say in terms of how safe the organization and the culture feels, and whether or not growth is possible.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that analogy because I know you were talking about earlier, like you said, one person cannot control the company culture, and it's just not possible as well to make sure that, it's your job to make sure everyone feels inclusive. But with the caveat, inclusion initiatives that you talked about as well do not just happen, and you need to kind of be intentional around the conditions. So I think that's a really good way of putting it. I'm going to think about that and take that with me. As well, I want to shift a little bit to your experience in the industry at large too. So my next question is not necessarily at BCW. It could be anywhere that you've worked or just things that you're seeing out in the universe. But when people are creating these strategies, even with the best intentions, mistakes do happen. And when you make a mistake, you own up to it and then you move on and you do better next time. But what are some common mistakes that you're seeing either leaders or companies make when they're really trying to scale their organization at a rapid pace, but also maintain that company culture?
This is a big umbrella answer, but it really encapsulates so many different kind of varieties of how this shows up. Without a doubt, to me, the biggest mistake that leaders make as they're trying to scale, as they're trying to navigate change, as they're trying to bring, their organizations forward towards their vision, is resisting or refusing or closing to change themselves. I think it's very tempting to reach a particular milestone in your organizational growth and feel like or think that what got you to that place is what you should keep doing in order to get to the next place. But at the next level, both for a growing company or for an individual leader who is developing, what's going to be required in that next level is something that's actually new, right? It's not what you've done before in order to get there. So the biggest mistake that I think I see most leaders making is thinking that they have to have it all figured out and thinking that their past experience tells them what is needed, instead of looking around and taking the temperature of what's going on in today's world and what's needed for me to show up in new ways. Leaders, and we all do it, I do it too, we get stuck in our own expertise, right? We get rewarded for our expertise. We get, praised for knowing this stuff or doing this thing. And then we think, great, I'll just do more of that. So our mindset becomes a victim of our success at a leadership level. And I think that for the organizations that are really struggling to turn very important corners right now, whether it's navigating the brave new world of remote working or, any number of the complex issues facing business leaders today, I think it is a resistance to open to the invitation that change is offering us today.
Yeah, there's a lot of change happening, and to navigate that, you can't just rely on the things that you've done for the past couple of years, even the past few months. You mentioned, remote work too, and even like a virtual first environment, how you try to include people in meetings, how you communicate with the team. It's all changing, and you need to really adapt to that. So I definitely, I appreciate that answer.
So sorry, Christina, I don't mean to interrupt you. just wanted to say, it sounds so obvious when we say it out loud, but to actually do it, right? To actually show up to work and at your next meeting, open to the possibility that you're wrong about something, or open to the possibility that someone who maybe is younger than you has a perspective, right, that is more informed than you, or sees something more clearly than you. I mean, these are things that are really very difficult to do, which is why, investing in coaching, investing in leadership development is so critical for any business and organization that is trying to turn these corners.
Yeah, I think those resources are really important. Coaching, internal professional development, just reaching out to folks within the organization too, whether it's peers or cross-collaborating with mentors as well. On the opposite side, so on the more positive kind of side of where you see the industry going to, are there any trends that you think that organizations need to implement in their strategy to be successful in the future, be agile, and really, really adapt?
I think it's leadership development. I mean, for all of the reasons we've talked a lot about it today, it's increasingly where I'm focusing my work more and more. I think that if you are not developing your leaders, by which I mean holistically, it's not just about the technical skills that have, gotten you to the C-suite or wherever it is you happen to be, the VP level, the SVP level. You've got to have those technical skills, but you have to pair them with the relationship skills and with the conceptual skills like growth mindset, flexible thinking, risk tolerance, that are going to make you a truly well-rounded leader. And then you have to have self-awareness around where your strengths are in those skill sets and where you need to look elsewhere for support and complementary skills. So if we don't have leaders that are continually developing and self-reflecting, your culture will stagnate and your business will not succeed.
Yeah, again, that self-reflection piece and self-awareness piece is really important to leadership. It's about you and the team and your relationship there, but also just being self-aware for you as a leader too. And I think some of the best managers and leaders that I've seen are really self-aware and, again, lead with empathy and a growth mindset, as you were talking about too.
Yeah.
In terms of your personal experience, I'm sure that you have many of these, but what is the most kind of rewarding part of your job?
I mean, the people. I think everybody probably says that, everyone in my line of work, but I love connecting with incredible people who I'm very fortunate to work with throughout my organization. It's a brilliant team that I get to be a part of. And I love connecting with them to tackle these big, meaty, juicy, complex challenges that we're all facing right now. So I don't find there to be anything more satisfying than co-creating a really beautiful, elegant solution to something that is really difficult and hard and delicate and sensitive, because doing that work also brings us as a team together in the process. So you get to a kind of a beautiful place in terms of the outcome, but you have this added benefit of you've been through something together and you know each other on a meaningful level, and you've grown together. And that, when it comes to employee retention, which is something that I think a lot of organizations are struggling with right now, we can't discount experiences like that. I mean, some of it's salary, some of it's perks, some of it's flexibility, but some of it is just giving people that appropriate, exciting, enticing level of challenge with a strong degree of that safety that helps them come through it and feel like, wow, I grew as a result of that. I grew together with the people around me. That's the best part of my job, hands down.
Yeah, I think those two pieces of psychological safety and feeling like you're growing with a healthy, amount of challenge is really important. And sometimes we talk about on the show too. I would gather that a lot of people don't stay at a job for the free lunches or, the ping pong tables. It's more so the two things that you mentioned and really creating those strategies. And it is exciting in your role that you get to touch so many different departments and work with a bunch of different folks to make sure that systems are healthy for people as well. I know we talked about a bunch of different topics today, but is there anything that you really want to share with our audience that I didn't ask, or 1 to 2 key takeaways that you hope they walk away with as we close out our conversation together?
I think if there's one big theme that I keep coming back to these days in everything that I do, whether I'm working with a team internally, or this has been a big theme for me on LinkedIn over the past few months as we've been looking at the remote working agita coming up for a lot of leaders, is that change does not have to be as hard as we make it, right? I think change is hard. Like that's one of those axioms that's just maxims that's just like tossed around like, oh, this is going to be difficult. It's going to be painful. And I think there's a significant amount of wisdom in, just acknowledging that change does require a lot of us. But there is, I think, an easier way to facilitate change, to lead change, to navigate change. And I think that it comes back to this relationship that we have to control. If we are trying to control all those factors in the ecosystem, if we are trying to just make people do what we want them to do, right? It's like that is, it's, you can just feel the tightness, you can feel the rigidity, and change, is not going to go away just because we might be ignoring it or resisting it or outright fighting it. We really need to focus instead on creating those conditions with those meaningful challenges, with that psychological safety for our teams to rise to the opportunity of this moment. And control really has nothing to do with it. So it's a lot of, we will make our lives as leaders so much easier. Not only will we be more effective, but our lives will be easier. We will be less burnt out. We will be less exhausted. If we can let go of that story that says that we're supposed to have all the answers, that we're supposed to have it all figured out, that our expertise is what's going to save the day, and just engage our people in reflecting on the opportunities that exist today, the challenges that we're all facing, and start to participate in building and co-creating those solutions together.
What a hopeful and great call to action to end on. I think of when you were talking about the story we tell ourselves, Brene Brown, and mixing up what we're telling ourselves and just having that growth mindset and co-creating together. So I absolutely love that. Kristen, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. It was so nice to meet you, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
It's been a real pleasure, Christina. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, AllVoices believes in the empowerment of everyone at an organization to speak up, and we know it's a requirement for the company to be successful. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.